All right. Hey, welcome to the Usco podcast. I'm here with a very new friend because we met like a week ago. This is Adam Ward. Adam, love to hear a little bit about you personally, professionally, and then we're going to dig into what's one of my favorite topics today.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate you having me here. Quick about me. I am a founding partner at a firm called Growth by Design Talent. We work with a lot of early stage and growth stage startups around all things recruiting. Prior to starting that firm about 4 years ago, I ran recruiting at a company called Pinterest, and prior to that, Facebook, Qualcomm, and some other companies. But what's really hopefully interesting to all of you is I grew up through university recruiting. So the first 10 to 12 years of my career at companies including Qualcomm and Facebook were running and building out their university recruiting programs. So spent a lot of time on college campuses and seeing a lot of the patterns of students in terms of universities they went to, majors, and outcomes. And I really love that part of recruiting, which is helping students think through their careers and matching their personal interests and intrinsic motivations with career outcomes and jobs and careers and things like that. So excited to be with all of you and dive in here a little bit.
Well, you're making me smile because I remember when I was a senior in college, and if you were on the other end of this would probably become one of your stories that you would tell later on, because in my final interview to go work for this big accounting firm, I did multiple rounds. I have like an identity crisis. I'm like almost like a panic attack in the interview because the guy asked me the question that no one had asked. Why do you want to work here? And I was like, I don't, if I'm honest. And I don't want to have this as a life. And I don't really know why I'm doing this in the first place. And that voice in my head of like, don't be honest. He just, for some reason, finally asked that one question that broke the seal for me. I'm like, I got to share this with somebody. So that's a big part of what I'm fascinated about from your perspective. You've hired and been in countless conversations with young people. You've heard probably the good, bad, and the ugly of how they talk about themselves and their story. What do you see, I guess on both sides, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that could give a young person watching this or a parent or an educator who works with kids some sort of like hooks or handles or ladder to build in terms of skills?
Yeah, well, first of all, kudos to you for having the courage to answer the question honestly. I think more often than not, so much is leading up to that very moment, the pressure to tell the person what they want to hear.
Right.
More often than not happens. And the outcome is you start down a path of a career that you think you're supposed to have,
right,
but you truly don't want to have. And we all know people who, answered it the opposite to you and started that career in finance, accounting, sales, engineering, choose the outcome. And 18 months in, 2 years in, they are not happy. And not only, and because they're not happy and are not getting fulfillment from the work, they're not being successful. And so now you kind of get this like bit of a spiral thing. Yep. And so what eventually happens is through their decisions or others, they, have to almost backtrack, in their career. They have to find that thing that they have to kind of reconnect with that thing that is fulfilling for them and change career paths. And the cost of that, literally financially, but also emotionally and on relationships and other things, mental health, is tremendous. And so the more work we can do upfront to determine and help identify those things where you get energy and fulfillment, then think about the career outcome. But a lot of our systems to really till recent date has been around starting with the like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right. Think about that question. What do you want to be? And it's not, I want to be a well-rounded human. I want to, they're these very tactical job outcomes. Right. And so if you start there, then you actually, it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy that you need to do these things to do that. So I want to be an accountant because my mother was an accountant. Okay, great. So now you backtrack from that. What schools do you need to go to be an accountant? What classes do you need to take in high school? What tutoring should you be doing after school now in middle school, right? You know, first it's like, what's the question? It's what do you enjoy? Where do you get energy?
Right.
Where are you, like, what do you really do in your free time? And
Yeah.
then let that be the outcome of the job. But we
Yeah.
actually work backwards now as a society.
So
So I don't
what do
know
you
that answer your
do?
question
No,
specifically,
no,
but
this
versus
is
like a
perfect.
trend. Yeah.
Because it reminds me a few years later, instead of going into accounting, I worked on a university campus and had conversations with students that I wish I'd had with somebody had with me. And it turned out it was probably 6 or 7 years after that moment that I was getting lunches every single week for a couple months with there was 6 different employees at the same accounting firm that I had intended to work at, and I'd known all of them when they were back in college, and we had just kept up, kept up relationally. And at one point, all 6 of them had said, "I made a mistake. I should not be here. I don't want to be here." And I had this thought, maybe self-serving, to go to and email the managing partner and say, "I'm kind of like a bounty hunter for you right now. I could either
Yeah.
skew them to leave here pretty quickly, which is going to cost you a tremendous amount of money, or
Yeah.
you can pay me 15 grand and I'll get them dialed in and help them tap into purpose and passion." But
Yeah.
ultimately, all 6 of them left over the next couple of years because it wasn't the right thing. So, and I imagine you sit in between there as you work for people to help hire folks. There's a lot of cost involved for making the wrong choice that you talked about
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
someone's life and for the
Yeah.
company.
For sure. I think we've all seen the stat, you know, the cost to replace someone that's a mishire. So just the
Yeah.
cost of the company is 2x their salary.
Ooh.
But there's a much bigger like emotional cost and impact on the business that, you know, that's harder to enumerate.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I maybe want to clarify is not all meaning and purpose has to come through our jobs,
That's right.
but when we generally spend so much significant time of our
Yeah.
day in
Yeah.
working weeks of working, that
Yeah.
you can have both. It does not
Right.
have to be this decoupling of I work here and then I get meaning and fulfillment outside here.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't have to be one, or it doesn't. They don't have to be one and the same either.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
get meaning and fulfillment, you know, from work. You can also do things that are fulfilling to you that also require work. And
Yeah.
so I think we like to talk in these maxims sometimes
Right.
of work-life balance. Balance
Yep.
sounds like it's equilibrium,
Mm-hmm.
or meaning in work, or like, and like it's like it seems like these one or zeros, and it's
Yeah.
not that way. Actually, there's shades of gray and
Right.
continuum here, and for each person, where you derive value and where you derive purpose could be a different blend, could be a different formula,
Yeah.
and you get to learn that formula as you grow, as you do projects in school,
Right.
or as you get involved in things in school or outside of school or with your family. You can start paying attention to that
Mm-hmm.
balance of like where you get that energy and purpose through what mediums and through what
Yeah.
vehicles, and then you start to apply that as, you know, life progresses for you.
What are the things as you hire, what are the things that you're looking for? And I obviously it's a given some sort of competency for the role, but beyond that, what are you looking for and how do you look for it?
Yeah, yeah. For context, I'll say we did these meta studies both at Pinterest and Facebook, where we had enough employees we hired and also enough data points in interviews that we've done over time to map a couple things.
Huh.
One would be, you know, the outcomes being we can measure performance in the company. We could also
Okay.
measure like engagement. So engagement, thinking about that is like how excited about my job overall, like how happy are you at work?
Yeah.
And what we found over time for success of people who are both performing and happy. And by the way, those aren't the same. Just because you're
Mm-hmm.
performing well doesn't mean you're also the happiest. There
Mm-hmm.
is like some, but it's not a direct correlation.
Hmm.
Is that we would then map that back to the interviews. And so we said,
Okay.
hey, the person who did the best on their skills
Huh.
and versus like characteristics. So skills being I know how to write code in a certain language. I
Yeah.
can use a financial software. I know how to sell a product. And versus characteristics being an effective communicator,
Mm.
collaborator, has grit, whatever it might be really
Mm-hmm.
important for that company. What actually is more correlated to performance and happiness over time surprisingly not, is the characteristics,
Ah,
not the tangible skill. The tangible skills are a little bit of like the given in the theorem. They're a little bit of
yeah,
like the basic qualifications. Like,
right.
but generally, if you're interested in that job, you have the basic qualification. What separates
Yeah,
someone who's like really good from really great, or really okay from really happy in the job, is those other things.
yeah.
So what I love about recruiting is mapping someone's motivations and
Hmm.
like where they spike on the characteristic side about what's unique about a company or about an
Yeah.
industry. And those are all very dynamic things. So, you might think one software company is the same as another software company, one accounting firm, but they're actually
Hmm.
very different cultures.
Hmm.
And they're very different things and value systems in place
Yeah,
around that. And I love mapping a company's core values to a person's core values. And when you get that alignment, it is
yeah.
magic. It is magic. So have you ever maybe had a job interview, is a very specific example, but maybe, or even met someone and it just is like, you kind of almost get like tingle. Like you walk out of that conversation so excited and
Yeah.
energized. You want to go do something about that. Like
Yep.
that, because there's been an alignment on more of like the values than
Hmm.
the responsibilities of the job, if you will. And so that mapping and matching is like the magic of recruiting or job searching. And,
Yeah.
most job searching is kind of broken because you have to have like a ton of conversations to hopefully find that match. But
Right.
it's
Right. Right.
actually more the intrinsic motivations to a company's core of a person, to a
Huh.
company's core values that really make the perfect match.
To specifically get into that, how do you measure those characteristics? Is it something that you're going off of intuition? Do you have assessments that you're doing? How do you look for that?
There are assessments. There are, great things around like strengths finders and,
Yeah.
Myers-Briggs. And there's lots of things out there um, that are great measures. I love just asking questions of people. So,
Yeah.
what was the last time you were doing something that you just lost track of time?
Hmm.
What were you doing?
Hmm.
I was I was reading a great book. Okay,
Hmm.
tell me about the book. What was in it?
Yeah.
Like what made it fascinating? Because not every great book you look up. Not every book you read you look up. You're like, wow, I just lost 3 hours. Like,
Right.
what was it about? What
Right.
was the content? What was the topic? So you kind of really dig in, and when people feel like they're like in that flow or like lose track
Yeah.
of time. If you could do anything in the world, what would it be?
Mm-hmm.
What are you in the top 5% of everyone at doing? And it's often like, not a skill, but like something like a characteristic you have or a personality trait or something. What are you really great at? And
Yeah.
so this like self-awareness and people's actually self-selection around things is hugely powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Often it takes the right probing questions to get at it, and then you can map that to more understood constructs like assessments and things like that too. But I like kind
Yeah.
of digging in a little bit deeper behind it.
How do you then, if you're a candidate in that case, and your experience with college age students, how do you get to a place where you can give answers like that? I guess I'm kind of floating around like, do you either have good character or not? And I obviously I don't think that, but what then can you do in terms of development to be intentional so you get to an interview and that stuff flows authentically out of it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one is like we all have good character. It just may be harder for some of us to like have other things that happen, like harder to tap in, or kind of it
Yeah.
feels maybe not as at reach or maybe not as obvious for you. I'm a big believer in like really people understanding what their strengths are and what they're
Hmm.
good at, and then just communicating those. What often happens in trying to apply for a university or a
Hmm.
job is you try to mold what
Right.
you are good at to the recipient.
Right.
And what happens is like you're, the square in a round
Uh-huh.
hole type of thing. You're kidding yourself and you're selling yourself on something that actually isn't a great fit.
Right.
So back to your example of the accounting firm, I
Hmm.
imagine you were telling yourself narratives to
Yeah.
continue on that track,
Oh yeah.
because that's what it would take. Those are the answers that were needed to
Yep.
get to that outcome.
Yep.
And so if you actually lead with, and like here's like where I'm really strong, and it takes a whole lot of vulnerability
Hmm.
and confidence to be able to say those things, knowing that you're more than likely not to get rejected
Hmm.
up front. that's actually the better outcome than taking that job at the accounting firm and 8 weeks
Yeah.
in, 8 months in, realizing that's not the right fit, because it's going to work out. It's going to work
Right.
itself out. It's better to like bring it to the front and help you at that decision point versus being stuck in something later. The
Right.
wrong universe, that happens a lot. You see a
Yeah.
lot of transfers happen after 1 year or one semester
Yep.
where the culture of that university, the size, the curriculum isn't the right fit for you. Maybe
Yeah.
not be the right time to go to a university or
Mm-hmm.
college. And that, think how costly that was to you as a parent. Think how emotionally
Totally.
impact on the student.
Yeah.
And so the more, if you lead with what you're strong at and can communicate that, that's going to actually help the match happen more
Mm-hmm.
accurately up front.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I actually got fast tracked in that accounting example because I'd been to a recruiting event about a year before and I walked in late. I saw where all the other students were like congregating around. I mean, they were just
Mm-hmm.
like leeches to like the big firms, and there's this one
Yeah.
guy on the side, and I just was kind of like, I missed it. I'm over it. I don't even care. And I walk up and just really start chatting with this guy, older guy, and he's
Mm-hmm.
asking me a bunch of questions. And then he says, "What do you think about doing this summer? Aren't you supposed to get an internship? You know, that's the track that you're on." And I
Right.
and I look at him. I was like, I go, "Hey, okay, I have two options. I can get an internship with you guys, or this girl that I'm in love with is going to study abroad in Italy." And I'm like, why would I do an internship? And then it turned
Yeah.
out, I found out the next day that that guy that I was just BSing with turns out to be one of the key partners in this big accounting firm. And so he was
Yeah.
in that candid, like me just being totally authentic. He's like, well, you want that guy. And,
Mm-hmm.
but to your
Yeah.
point, I think, how do you get to that environment for a young person when there's a lot of stress, there's pressure, there's
A lot of
anxiety
stress.
in an interview? And for me, I mean, when I'm in that mode, the last thing I could do is think clearly, and I start, dry mouth, all that stuff. So do you have any
Mm-hmm.
like real practical advice on that end in terms of telling your
Yeah.
story and communicating clearly?
Yeah. Well, it takes a lot of work to get there. And it honestly, it takes a lot of mistakes. And
Yeah.
the more that you can learn from really early things, around, hey, I tried that class and I didn't like, what did I learn from that? Like, that wasn't a right fit
Right.
for me. I tried that friendship. I tried that part-time job, and like, and it
Mm.
takes a lot of support and guidance from friends and family to help like think about what are the lessons learned,
Yeah.
how do I
Yeah.
apply those next time. So
Yeah.
the growth mindset is powerful in a lot of ways, and that's one way. But you have to, you knowing you're going to try things and things aren't going to work out, but that's okay, because there's value in that
Yeah.
lesson learned that you apply.
Yeah.
I think when you think about like the interview, I think often interviews feel like a one way thing. And
Right.
actually the word interview is actually around like them extracting information to see if you're a right fit.
Hmm.
And as much as you can, going in with like the level of confidence, I'm like, I'm actually trying to extract information too, to see if they're a right fit for me.
Right. Right.
And the more you can kind of go into that balance of like, I'm both buying and selling
You're right.
versus just selling, the
Yeah.
more you're going to get the right signal if this is the right fit for me. And that's like super easy to say in this,
Right.
abstract conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Very difficult to apply when you might have school loans or expectations
Yeah.
from families to get a
Right.
job.
Right.
But the more you can put yourself in situations of doing the research around yourself and what companies or industries or
Yeah.
careers might be more interesting, the more likely you're to be in a situation where that's going to be a more natural give and take,
Yeah.
versus like you're selling yourself to the company of like, here's why I'm a great fit. But in the back of your mind, you're also trying to convince yourself that you're a
Yeah.
great fit. And when it actually is a good fit, it just is.
Mm-hmm.
There doesn't feel like you're having to make up these things or
Right.
shape your answers around the expectations of what that person wants.
It's just a match.
It's just a
So
match. And again,
as
super easy to say in the abstract.
yeah, right, right. Well, it reminds me, and you and I are both familiar with this organization called the Honor Foundation. It's mostly special operators like Navy SEALs going in this career transition program. And there's one particular
Mm-hmm.
night they do now where they bring in a bunch of hiring managers in for a kind of a mock speed interview night. And I've been in that room a few times, and it's, I mean, one hand, it's ironic to hear Navy SEALs be like, "This is the worst thing I've ever done. Not to talk about myself. I'd rather be in combat. I'd rather be shot at."
Yeah. Yeah.
But then to hear the iterations of, I mean, they go through 5 or 6, 7 different times of just sitting down with someone who asked the question, So tell me about yourself. Who are you? What are you looking for?
Yeah.
And they'll come back after that event and say, I mean, incredibly exhausting, but incredibly valuable to go through the repetitions of learning how to communicate and how to trim stuff away that's unnecessary and irrelevant, and get to the right good stuff.
Yeah. And it's those core nuggets of things, they, might have led a platoon of soldiers. They might have
Yeah.
led an operation, but it's distilling it down to these, characteristics of leadership or
Right.
organization or communication that
Yep.
are actually quite transferable. And we don't talk enough about transferable skills. We
Right.
often talk about like hard skills or soft skills.
Yep.
I think there's a blend of those, which are these transferable
Hmm.
skills. I think it's unfair to call communication a soft skill.
Uh-huh.
I actually think it's a hard
Yeah.
skill to learn and be good at, and it's highly transferable.
Right.
And so those, like distilling those things down and trying to identify those as early as you can. And it's not like you have it or not. These are
Yeah.
all skills that you can learn and
Right.
develop. And some of us have a more natural
Mm-hmm.
preposition towards it,
Mm-hmm.
but it takes a lot of practice and miles and feedback to
Yeah.
improve on it.
So kind of winding down a little bit, as a dad, what messages are you hoping to instill in your kids? How do you even think about that? Like, what do you hope they pick up on over the years, watching you, listening to you? What are you hoping to pass on?
Yeah, and sometimes as a parent, it's also so close to you.
Yeah.
The,
Uh-huh.
the cobbler's
Totally.
kids have no shoes,
Yeah.
because there's a bunch of other emotions wrapped in there, as
Mm-hmm.
well, and other like dynamics happening. It's not just thinking about like learnings and careers for my kids as
Yeah.
well. I think it's really thinking about each child being very unique and wired very differently. I have identical twin daughters
Yeah.
who
Even more
literally have the
interesting.
same DNA,
Uh-huh.
and to see what they're drawn to, how they react to certain things from very early days and weeks and months helps you. They're just, people are wired differently,
Yeah.
even if they have relatively the same environment and genetic makeup, they're just different. And so giving them the space to explore and be their different person and like make those mistakes. And, I think a part of as a parent, my goal is like help create that safety net for when they do, to help pick them up, learn the lesson from it and move on.
Yeah.
But none of us are going to be perfect. And each of the paths of my three girls are going to be very different. Maybe all three won't go to college, and maybe that's okay. Maybe they're going to do very different things and have different value systems but success isn't going to be measured the same for each of them in terms of like jobs and careers and income and families. They're going to do widely different things, and knowing like all of that is okay, because what really matters is like for them that it feels like success and rewarding, fulfilling, and purpose, not my definition of what it is for them. And if we're guilty of anything as parents, which a lot of things, is us putting our values and measures of success and fulfillment on our children. And that now they start chasing those things. Maybe they start chasing the path to being an engineer or a doctor, and sacrificing maybe some things in their heart that they know are not aligned with, where they're intrinsically motivated or excited.
Well, we just did a few nights ago this live workshop, it's like 30 kids in Rancho Bernardo, and two of the kids in the room were my kids, and I'm leading them through this series of questions and exercises, helping them ultimately get to that question of what are you going to do, like we talked about at the beginning, but layering in all these other lenses to look through about all the same stuff you started with, like your priorities, your values, what kind of people do you want to be, like those sorts of things. And then when I got home, I don't think my son's going to listen to this, so I can say it. I saw his little packet, his worksheet, and I was like, maybe I should read it. Maybe I shouldn't, but I did. And then one of the questions was, who do you look up to? And from their professional life, who's someone that you look up to and how they work, not what they do, but how they work. And he says, my dad. I was like, and then he writes, because he seems to enjoy what he does. And I just thought in a clear instance back to me in this identity crisis in an interview. And I told the guy, I'm really worried that I'm going to become 40 and still work here and become someone I'm not meant to be. And then to hear that, I was like, okay, good.
You had the right
I don't think he knows what I do
path.
Really, but at least he has some observation at 16 that I enjoy it.
But if his measure is enjoyment, like that's like that's the value construct you want. And, you know, if you look at any profession, the people who are the best at what they do are highly successful, meaning like top of their profession. Sometimes that's commensurate with compensation, things like that. Sure. But actually, more than that, it's around fulfillment and energy. And they're at the top because they actually, at the end of the day, they would do that job for free because they enjoy it so much. And so that, you know, sometimes we're chasing like what is like the top salaries or all that stuff, and like you're chasing the wrong thing. And so starting with like identifying what they really enjoy, where they find fulfillment, allowing that to take its course is going to ultimately lead to success as defined by a rewarding life, fulfilling life, one with purpose.
Last question. Is there any resource that comes to mind? And there's a couple different things to think through. One is just really employment in general. There's this collective narrative out in culture right now that employment's changing rapidly, where work happens, quiet quitting. So is there anything that comes to mind on that a little? And then the other side of it would be somebody that is young that wants to really think this stuff through. Is there a book you recommend or a podcast or anything that you just kind of say, hey, pay attention to this one?
That's tough. I probably would need to follow up on some of like the very specific things. A couple of thoughts is you're going to have many careers now. So you're not choosing a career. Right. You're going to do, there's different chapters in your life too. I think the future of work is actually multiple jobs at the same time. So I think in 15 years, no one will be working for one employer. They'll actually be working for multiple. And so you might think about slices of your work. I don't even want to say week because I don't think it'll be during week. Slices of your working time will be working on different projects for different organizations. Some of them will be your own. And so I think the thought of working for one company for a fixed period of time, for a fixed period of hours, will be gone. And so that the construct of thinking about what job do I want or what company I'm going to working for, I think will be changing significantly.
Old fashioned.
It's very old fashioned. And to think about, even now it seems really bizarre 3 years later that you would show up at a company at 8:00 and be there till 5 because that's what we did. Like like the pandemic is shifting that too in many cases. That's already weird. So that you worked for one place, that you were beholden to one company and one organization, when you actually have a wide range of interests and skills outside of that one job and company, I think we'll also be like, that was weird that we did that. I don't think it's that far away. The book that I always recommend, which might be in the like more high school to college range, is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. I think emotional intelligence was 15 years ago and 20, for the next 20 years, the most important thing that people can develop and the most malleable. And so I really encourage that book as a great way to really understanding what emotional intelligence is and how people can continue to develop it.
Awesome. Well, Adam, thanks so much for being on this. I could talk to you for hours, and hopefully we'll
thanks. That went quickly.
That went real quick. Thanks for what you're doing and how much you care. And we're comrades and caring for young people and building meaningful lives. So we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining in on the U-School podcast. We'd love to share with you the resources available on our website at theuschool.com. Not just articles, ebooks, worksheets, and other podcast episodes, but specifically, you should know about a free course we have available called the Real Me course. It's digital, it's interactive, and it'll guide you to get clear about who you are and the great story you could tell with your life. So go register for a free account and get started on the Real Me course today at theuschool.com. That's theuschool.com.